Silence swallows the candlelit booth at the back of Valenti's restaurant like the lid of a coffin being sealed. Nicholas Valenti, 6'2", broad-shouldered, his tailored Italian suit costing more than most people's cars, kneels on the black marble floor beside the leather banquette where his daughter Emma lies motionless. She is 6 years old. Her lips are turning blue. Her small chest rises and falls so quietly you would miss it if you were not listening for your own child's breath. 12 men in black stand frozen around them. These are men who have broken bones with their bare hands. Men who have stared into the barrel of a gun without flinching. Men who have been loyal to Nicholas Valenti for 15, 20, sometimes 25 years. Their hands tremble uselessly at their sides. Tony and Luca, his two closest lieutenants, flank him on either side. Their faces have drained of all color. The golden light from the candles flickers across their features like a dying flame. Nicholas touches his daughter's cold forehead. His fingers, which have signed death warrants with the same casual gesture a man uses to check his watch, now shake like an old man's. His voice, when he speaks, comes out as barely a whisper. "Call the hospital. Now." But even as he says it, he knows it is useless. 12 minutes away. Emma does not have 12 minutes. The poison, and he knows it is poison because there are only 3 things in this city that kill this fast, this quiet, this complete. The poison is already winning. Then the kitchen door swings open. A woman in a stained delivery uniform pushes through the crowd of suits and expensive fabric. She is young, maybe 28, but her eyes carry the weight of someone who has lived a lifetime compressed into a few short years. Her left eye is swollen purple and yellow, the kind of swelling that does not come from an accident. Her throat bears the clear shape of handprints, bruises forming in the exact pattern of human fingers wrapped around her neck like a collar. There are other marks too, visible on her wrists where her sleeves ride up. This is Mia Voss. Delivery driver for Valenti's for the last 6 months. Invisible. Forgotten the moment she walks back out into the night. But this moment is not about invisibility. She drops to her knees without hesitation, moving with a certainty that cuts through the paralysis in the room like a blade. From her worn leather bag, she pulls a recipe book. The cover is faded, water-stained, held together with string. The pages are yellowed with age. The handwriting in the margins is cramped, dense, written in a language that is not quite Italian and not quite English, but something older, something that belongs to a grandmother who has been dead for 7 years. "Move," Mia says. Not a question. Not a request. The men part. She flips through the pages with trembling fingers, and then she stops. There. A notation in her grandmother's handwriting, in the margin beside a recipe for something called zuppa di veleno. Poison soup. But written below it, in fading pencil, are 3 words in her grandmother's shaky hand: antidote. Activated charcoal. Licorice root. Mia's hands do not shake as she moves to the bar. She grabs a bottle of activated charcoal supplement, the kind you find in health food stores, the kind that costs $4 and sits on shelves next to people's morning vitamins. She finds licorice root tea in a cabinet. She knows where everything is. She has worked here for 6 months. She has cleaned every corner of this restaurant, has memorized the placement of every bottle, every glass, every forgotten item in the back. She mixes something with her hands that do not shake despite the bruises covering her body, despite the handprints on her throat, despite everything in her life that should make her fall apart. "Trust me," she says, and her voice is steady like a candle that has learned to burn in the wind. Nicholas Valenti stares at her. Really stares. For the first time, he is seeing this woman who has walked invisibly through his restaurant for 6 months, taking orders, delivering food, smiling with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. He is seeing her not as an employee but as someone who moves while the most powerful man in Los Angeles stands paralyzed. She opens Emma's mouth gently, carefully, with the tenderness of someone who knows what it is like to be hurt. She pours the mixture slowly, deliberately, watching as his daughter's throat contracts, as her body registers what is happening. Seconds pass. Then 10 seconds. Then 30. Emma's eyes flutter. The blue recedes from her lips like a tide going out. She is breathing, Tony whispers. His voice cracks on the word. Mia sits back on her heels, and only then do her hands begin to shake. Only then does the weight of what she has done, what she has just admitted to knowing, settle across her shoulders like a stone. Nicholas Valenti looks at this woman kneeling beside his daughter, and something cold and dangerous and entirely new stirs in his chest. She saved Emma's life. This woman with $34 in her pocket. This woman with bruises forming into patterns on her skin. This woman who carries her grandmother's recipe book and knows things about poison and antidotes that should not exist in the margins of a grandmother's cooking notes. Emma reaches out and wraps her small arms around Mia's neck. "Thank you," she whispers. "Thank you for not leaving me." Mia closes her eyes. She does not cry. She has learned not to cry. But her body shakes with the weight of 7-year-old arms around her neck, with the realization that she has just revealed something that was meant to stay hidden. She holds Emma and thinks about how sometimes you save a life and destroy your own anonymity in the same breath. Nicholas's men exchange looks. In 15 years, in 20 years, in some cases in 25 years of loyal service, they have never seen him move toward someone with anything but suspicion. They have never seen him kneel. They have certainly never seen him allow a stranger to touch his daughter. But he is not moving toward her with suspicion now. He is moving toward her like a man soothing a lost child. He kneels beside both of them, his $1,000 suit pressing into the marble, and he places one hand on the back of Mia's head. "What is your name?" he says. Not a question. "Mia," she whispers. "Mia Voss." "Mia Voss," he repeats, and the way he says it, the way her name sounds in his deep voice like thunder rolling across a distant sky, feels like something being recorded for a future that neither of them can see yet. "You came back." She does not understand what he means. She will understand later. Tony steps forward, his radio already in his hand. He is calling for a medical team, for the private doctors who keep people like them alive without asking questions that require answers. But even as he speaks into the radio, he watches his boss kneeling on the marble floor with a dead woman's granddaughter cradling his daughter, and he knows that everything has changed. The restaurant is silent except for the sound of Emma's breathing, steady now, returned from the edge of wherever poison tries to take small children. The candles flicker. The city outside continues without knowing that something has just shifted. The balance has been broken. The invisible has been seen. And in that silence, as the first snow of the season begins to fall beyond the restaurant windows, the question that will consume the next 3 months forms itself without words: who is Mia Voss, and what does she know that no one should know? The answer lives in the margins of a dead woman's recipe book, written in a handwriting that belongs to secrets, written in a language that connects 3 families and a crime that should have stayed buried 30 years ago. But that story, that answer, exists 3 months in the past. Tonight, in the candlelit booth at the back of Valenti's restaurant, all that matters is that a small girl is breathing, and a man who has built an empire on power and fear is learning what it feels like to owe his life to someone he does not understand. Now let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to the night that brought her here. 3 months earlier. A freezing blizzard on a Los Angeles highway. A car that has finally given up trying to run. A woman in a delivery uniform, walking through whiteout, her groceries spilling across black ice, her 2 children waiting alone in an apartment that is as cold as her hands are becoming. And in the back seat of a black Mercedes, a man in a cashmere coat worth more than her annual salary noticing her broken figure in his headlights and giving the kind of order that changes everything. But none of them know yet how tangled their lives are about to become. 3 months earlier. The November wind tore through the Los Angeles highway like a blade wrapped in ice. Snow fell in thick, suffocating sheets, the kind that swallows headlights and turns the world into a tunnel of white. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The I-10 had become a gauntlet of abandoned cars, their drivers having given up hours ago, their hazard lights blinking like dying heartbeats in the storm. Mia Voss finished her double shift at Valenti's at 11:47 in the evening. She hung her apron on the hook in the back kitchen, her hands shaking not from cold but from exhaustion, the kind that settles into your bones after 16 hours of standing, smiling, carrying, pleading. Her uniform was stained with wine and marinara sauce. Her feet ached in shoes held together by prayer and duct tape. She had collected $127 in tips throughout the night, real money, placed in her apron pocket by customers who saw her, who noticed the dark circles under her eyes, who perhaps understood that she was trying to keep 2 children alive on crumbs. Douglas Hale was waiting at the kitchen exit. He stood with his arms crossed, his expensive watch catching the fluorescent light, a gold Rolex that cost more than Mia's monthly rent. He was in his mid-40s, the kind of man whose cruelty had calcified into his face, hardening the lines around his mouth into something that looked like a permanent sneer. His cologne was overpowering, designer fragrance layered over the grease smell of the kitchen like a mask over rot. "You know the house rules, sweetheart," he said, his voice smooth like oil on water. "Tips go into the pool." His hand was already reaching for her apron pocket. Mia stepped back. "Douglas, no. The pool never comes back to us. You know that. I need." His hand moved faster than her body could follow. One moment she was speaking. The next moment his fingers wrapped around her throat, and the world narrowed to the sensation of pressure, of her airway closing, of her back slamming against the freezer door so hard that the entire unit shuddered. The cold metal was shock against her spine. His cologne filled her nostrils. She could see the pores of his skin up close, could see the calculation in his eyes, could feel his wedding ring pressing against her neck like a brand. "What you need," he whispered, "doesn't matter. What you have belongs to me. Everything in this restaurant belongs to me." He released her. Her hand flew to her throat as she gasped, her vision swimming with spots of black and purple. He pulled the bills from her apron pocket, all $127, stuffed them into his jacket without counting, as if the money was so insignificant it barely registered. "See you tomorrow night, sweetheart," he said, and walked away. Mia stood alone in the kitchen, her breathing ragged and shallow. She reached into her other pocket, the one where she kept her emergency cash, hidden in the lining where Douglas would never look. $34. That was all. $34 to last her until her next paycheck in 5 days, and rent was due in 2 weeks. $2,200. The number lived in her chest like a stone. She gathered her things and walked out into the blizzard. The wind hit her like a fist. The snow was so thick that she could barely see the parking lot, barely distinguish her ancient Honda Civic from the surrounding shadows. The car was a 2003 model, bronze and rusted, held together by prayers and the kind of stubborn refusal to die that Mia recognized in herself. She had paid $800 for it 3 years ago, and it had been failing in new and creative ways ever since. The grocery store bags crinkled in the back seat. She had bought them with her last paycheck, canned soup, store-brand bread, rice, dried beans, the cheapest proteins that could stretch across 14 days. 2 children to feed. Emma was 6 years old, with her father's dark eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness. Her younger son was 4, small for his age, a gentle thing who still had nightmares about the night his father left, who still asked every morning if Daddy was coming home today. Mia started the engine. The car coughed. The dashboard lights flickered like a dying patient on machines. She waited, her hands gripping the steering wheel, and tried again. The engine turned over, caught, held. She exhaled. The heater began to blow lukewarm air that smelled like burning rubber and old oil. The I-10 was a ghost road. She merged onto the highway, her headlights cutting through the white wall of snow, the windshield wipers beating a frantic rhythm against the accumulating ice. The car felt fragile, like tissue paper against the force of the wind. She drove slowly, both hands on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, counting the minutes until she would be home, until she could close the apartment door and wrap herself around her sleeping children and forget, for a few hours, about the pressure of Douglas Hale's hand on her throat. 42 minutes into the drive, the car began to shake. At first, it was a subtle vibration through the steering wheel. Then it became a violent shudder, as if the engine was convulsing. The temperature gauge on the dashboard spun suddenly to red. A grinding sound erupted from under the hood, metal against metal, the sound of something breaking irreparably. Mia pulled to the shoulder. The engine died with a final gasp. Steam hissed from under the hood, rising in ghostly plumes that were immediately swallowed by the snow. The car would not start again. She tried 3 times, and each time the engine simply clicked, dead as a body already buried. The temperature outside was 19 degrees. She was 14 blocks from her apartment. She was alone on a stretch of highway where traffic had stopped flowing hours ago. And the grocery bags on the back seat contained everything she had to feed 2 children. She grabbed the bags and began to walk. The snow was already ankle-deep on the shoulder of the highway, and it was falling faster now, as if the sky had finally decided to bury everything beneath it. Her shoes, thin, worn, the soles separating from the uppers, immediately soaked through. Her feet went numb within minutes. She had borrowed a jacket from the restaurant, and it was not nearly warm enough. The wind cut through it like the jacket was made of tissue paper. Her hands were already raw, red and burning with cold. One of the grocery bags split. Cans of soup rolled across the black ice, spinning like dice before disappearing into the darkness. She tried to retrieve them, sliding on the ice, falling to her knees. The asphalt was so cold it felt like it was burning her. She gathered what she could, stuffing what remained of the groceries back into the good bag, and continued walking. Her legs were not cooperating. The cold was making her clumsy, each step a conscious effort. Her mind kept cycling through numbers. $34. $200 for the car repair, the estimate she had gotten 3 weeks ago, which she had been unable to afford then and certainly could not afford now. $2,200 for rent. $6,000 for the surgery Emma might need next year, the surgery the doctors said was not urgent but would be necessary eventually. The numbers were a cage. She was crying. She did not notice when it started. Her tears froze on her cheeks. That was when she saw the headlights. 3 black SUVs cut through the blizzard like sharks through dark water, their headlights burning through the snow with such intensity that Mia had to shield her eyes. They were moving slowly, deliberately, as if they were hunting something. The convoy pulled to the shoulder ahead of her, and the vehicles came to a stop, their engines running, their exhaust creating pillars of vapor in the frozen air. Mia's body went rigid. She did not move forward. She did not run. She simply stood there on the black ice, a woman in a soaked uniform, groceries in her arms, her entire body shaking. The back door of the center vehicle opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, 6'2", with the kind of broad shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of an entire organization. He wore a cashmere coat, black, worth more than everything Mia had ever owned. His hands were bare despite the cold, long-fingered and pale, and one of them wore a silver ring carved with symbols she did not recognize. His face was striking, Korean features, sharp and beautiful, combined with an intensity that seemed to burn outward like heat. A scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, a thin white line that contradicted the otherwise immaculate appearance of everything else about him. His eyes were the color of storm clouds. And they were looking directly at her. "Tony." "Luca," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "Bring her." 2 more men emerged from the SUVs, massive, broad-chested, moving with the efficiency of people trained in violence. But they did not approach her with aggression. Instead, they moved with something like concern, as if they were approaching an injured animal that might flee. Mia stumbled backward. The groceries fell from her arms. Cans scattered across the ice. I don't have anything," she whispered. The man in the cashmere coat took a step closer. His voice, when he spoke again, was quieter, and somehow more dangerous. "You work at Valenti's. I have seen you there. What is your name?" She stared at him. The scar pulled at the skin around his eye as he frowned, as if her silence annoyed him. "Mia," she said finally. "My name is Mia Voss." "Well, Mia Voss," he said, "you are going to freeze to death if you continue walking. Get in the car." She looked at the open door of the SUV. She could feel the heat pouring out of it, feel the promise of warmth and safety. But she also knew something, understood it in the ancient part of her brain that still remembered how to calculate danger. She knew that men like this, men who drove black SUVs through snowstorms and ordered other men around with single words, did not offer help without wanting something in return. What she did not know was that she was wrong. What she did not know was that Nicholas Valenti, who owned the restaurant where she worked, who controlled 3 neighborhoods and the people within them, who had built an empire from the streets of Los Angeles through a combination of ruthlessness and code, was about to see something in her broken figure that would crack open the careful walls he had built around his heart. What she did not know was that 9 years ago, when Nicholas Valenti was a boy of 9 years old, he had stood in the snow-covered streets of Seoul, South Korea, his father's fist still warm on his face, and he had made himself a promise that he would become so strong, so powerful, that no one would ever be able to hurt him again. He had kept that promise. He had become untouchable. But strength cannot protect you from everything. And some wounds run too deep to ever truly heal. Mia Voss gripped her grandmother's recipe book, the small leather journal she had pulled from her bag before it hit the ice, the one that had belonged to her grandmother and her grandmother before her, filled with recipes in the margins, with notes, with secrets written in old-fashioned handwriting, and she walked toward the open door of the SUV. The moment she climbed inside, everything changed. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Valenti's restaurant in soft, cold rays that made the empty dining room look like a cathedral. 5:30 a.m. The kitchen exhaust fan hummed its lonely song, and the smell of yesterday's garlic still hung in the air like a ghost that refused to leave. Mia Voss pushed through the service entrance, her body moving with the careful, deliberate precision of someone who had learned to calculate every motion to minimize pain. Her left shoulder favored slightly inward. Her neck, where Douglas Hale's fingers had wrapped like a vice 3 nights ago, still showed the faint purple bloom of fingerprints, 5 distinct ovals that no amount of makeup could fully hide. She had tried. Foundation layered over the bruise, a turtleneck in November heat pulled high against her jaw. But the damage underneath was real. The damage inside was realer. She clocked in without looking at anyone, though Tony stood near the host station reviewing the night's reservations. Tony, 6'4" with silver threading through his dark hair, with eyes that had seen things that most people spent their whole lives never knowing existed. In 15 years of working for Nicholas Valenti, Tony had learned to read the restaurant like other men read newspapers. And what he read this morning made something cold settle in his chest. The way Mia moved. The way she held her left arm. The way her eyes had gone somewhere very far away. She began setting tables for the breakfast rush, folding napkins with mechanical precision. Each fold. Each placement. Each small task that filled the space where thinking used to be. This was survival. This was what women learned when men decided their bodies were permissions instead of people. Nicholas Valenti sat in his private booth, leather seats the color of old blood, a single candle burning in a crystal holder, the morning edition of the Los Angeles Times folded beside his espresso cup. He was reviewing invoices, the restaurant's legitimate finances, the numbers that his accountants reported to the IRS. The numbers that made sense on paper. The numbers that told no one about the men who disappeared, or the families who suddenly found their debts forgiven, or the silence that came when Nicholas Valenti decided someone needed to stop breathing. He did not look up when Mia entered the dining room. But he saw her. Every detail registered in his mind like a photograph developing in chemistry. The bruises on her collarbone. The way she favored her left side. The absolute absence of light in her eyes. Luca appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of fresh pastries, and he caught Nicholas's gaze fixed on the waitress. Luca, who had worked for this man for 12 years, who had held dying men in his arms and called it Tuesday, who understood that attention from the boss was never casual, Luca set down the tray and quietly withdrew. Then Douglas Hale emerged from the kitchen. He was a man of 47, with the soft body of someone who stole from people with nothing and called it wages. His manager's tie hung over a white shirt with sweat stains under the arms. And under his fingernails, dried blood. A small amount. The kind of blood that came from a woman's neck when she tried to turn her head away from something she did not want to feel happening. Hale touched Mia's shoulder as he passed. Just a brief contact. Just a reminder that he knew where she was, that he owned the space around her, that her body was a thing he could reach for whenever the urge struck him. His fingers lingered for 2 full seconds. Long enough for Mia to flinch. Long enough for her to close her eyes and disappear inside herself again. Nicholas watched this through the candlelight. He watched her flinch. He watched Hale smile like he had just told a pleasant joke. He watched her apologize, actually apologize, her voice barely audible, for something she had not done. Something inside Nicholas Valenti shifted. Not broke, exactly. But shifted. Like the moment before an earthquake when the earth moves in ways it was never supposed to move. When things that were supposed to be solid reveal themselves as temporary. As fragile. As wrong. His hands, which had held guns and wielded power and directed the lives of 300 men spread across Los Angeles, tightened around his espresso cup. The ceramic made a small, dangerous sound. A warning. A promise. Tony saw it happen from across the dining room. The change in his boss's posture. The way his jaw clenched. The way every muscle in his body went still in a way that usually preceded something catastrophic. "Boss?" Tony murmured, appearing at the edge of the booth. Not entering. Not presuming. Just making his presence available in case he was needed. Nicholas did not respond. He did not even seem to hear. He was watching Mia carry a stack of plates toward table 7, her hands trembling slightly, her movements the careful choreography of someone who had learned to be invisible. And what he saw was not just her. What he saw was 9-year-old Nicholas Valenti standing in the snow-covered streets of Seoul, South Korea, his face already beginning to swell where his father's fists had found him. His mother's voice calling to him from inside their apartment, begging his father to stop, and the sound of his father's fist finding her instead. He saw his mother's hand shaking as she tried to button her blouse the next morning. He saw her eyes that had learned the same trick Mia's eyes were learning now, the trick of being present in your body while being entirely absent from what was happening to it. Nicholas had been 9 years old. He was small. He was weak. He was helpless. He had made himself a promise that night, standing in that Seoul snow, his breath coming in small, pained gasps. He had whispered it to the winter. He had carved it into the part of his soul that still believed in such things. Never again. No child would watch his mother be destroyed. No woman would learn to apologize for her own pain. And if such a woman came into his world, if fate or circumstance or simple geographic accident placed her within his reach, he would burn the world down to fix it. At 14, he had kept that promise. His father had raised his hand one final time, and Nicholas, who by then had grown 4 inches and learned from the street fighters in the neighborhood that size was only one component of power, had broken his father's arm. He had done it quietly. He had done it without ceremony. And his father had never touched him again. Had never touched anyone again after that, actually, because Nicholas, growing older and more creative, had made sure the man understood that there were things worse than pain. At 16, he had immigrated to Los Angeles with nothing but his mother's recipes written on scraps of paper and the promise he had made to himself in the snow. By 26, he owned this restaurant. By 36, he owned the men who worked in restaurants across half of Los Angeles. By 43, he was the man who made decisions that ended in funerals. And he had never, not once in 27 years, allowed anyone to witness the thing that was moving through his chest right now. The rage. The bone-deep, cellular fury that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with that 9-year-old boy in the snow. He set down his espresso cup with deliberate care. He pulled out his phone. He made 3 calls. The first was to a man who specialized in vehicle repair. By noon, Mia's 1997 Honda Civic, the ancient car that had broken down on the highway, would be sitting in the parking lot of her apartment building. Full transmission repair. New battery. New tires. And the title transferred to her name, paid in full, no paper trail, no questions. The second call was to his accountant. A payment of $4,200 would be made to the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power from an anonymous charity account. Mia's overdue electric bill. Her overdue water bill. 3 months of forward payments. Invisible. Untraceable. Gone. The third call was to Tony. Full security detail, Nicholas said, his voice like stone sinking into water. On Mia Voss. She does not leave our sight. She does not walk to her car alone. She does not use an ATM without protection. Tell no one why. Make it look like routine. Make it look like nothing. Done, Tony said, because that was the only word that existed between them when Nicholas Valenti decided something. 3 blocks away, in a boutique office overlooking Pershing Square, Evelyn Blackwell sat at her mahogany desk, one hand wrapped around a coffee cup painted with the name of a coffee shop that no longer existed. She liked to keep evidence of businesses she had destroyed. She was 48 years old and looked 35 because money and cruelty were excellent moisturizers. Her hair was platinum blonde, cut in a way that cost $700 every 6 weeks. Around her neck hung a pearl necklace that had belonged to a duchess in 1952, worth $90,000, purchased from an estate sale using money that had come from the desperation of women like Mia Voss. Her phone rang. Douglas Hale. "We have a problem," he said. And though she could not see his face, she could hear the tremor in his voice. The fear. "We do not have problems," Evelyn corrected him, her voice like ice. "We have opportunities to correct situations." "Explain what you mean." "The boss was in the restaurant this morning. He watched me with the girl. He watched everything." Evelyn closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, she calculated whether Mia Voss needed to become a missing person. Whether the recipe book needed to be retrieved. Whether the risk had become larger than the reward. She opened her eyes. "Listen to me very carefully," she said. "That girl is nothing to him. She is a waitress. A desperate single mother who he saw in a snowstorm, and for one moment, felt something almost human. It will pass. These men, they do not sustain emotion. They sustain business. And our business is very profitable." But what Evelyn did not understand was that some men do sustain emotion. Some men simply choose to hide it beneath layers so thick that others mistake silence for indifference. And Nicholas Valenti was the kind of man who, once he decided to protect something, would protect it the way a general protects a kingdom. Completely. Ruthlessly. With the understanding that mercy was a cost he could not afford. The morning shift began. Breakfast orders flowed from the kitchen. Toast and eggs. Fresh fruit. The ordinary things. Mia moved through it all like a ghost, and in every corner of the dining room, though she did not notice, men in expensive watches and dark suits sat alone or in pairs, eating slowly, reading newspapers they did not actually read, their eyes never leaving the waitress who had no idea she was now the most protected woman in a 3-block radius. By the time her shift ended at noon, Tony had arranged for a man named Marcus to sit in a car across the street from her apartment building. Marcus had a thermos of coffee and instructions to make sure Mia and her children reached their apartment safely. He did not know why. He simply knew that this was what the boss wanted, and what the boss wanted was what kept you alive. Mia collected her tips, $17 from 8 tables, because people who can afford to eat breakfast at restaurants like Valenti's can also afford to pretend that service workers are invisible. She did not notice the man in the corner who left $40 on a $38 bill. She did not notice that it was the same man who had appeared at 3 different tables during her shift, each time ordering nothing, paying immediately, moving to wherever she was moving next. She simply clocked out. She picked up her grandmother's recipe book from her locker, that worn leather journal she always kept close, the one filled with recipes in her grandmother's handwriting and notes in the margins that she had never fully understood. Something about dates. Something about initials. Something in Italian that she had not bothered to translate. She walked toward the door. She did not notice the black SUV idling 3 spots down in the parking lot. She did not notice that everywhere she went, silence followed her like a devoted animal. The silence of protection. The silence of a promise being kept. But in his office above the restaurant, Nicholas Valenti knew exactly where she was. He had maps. He had men. He had the kind of resources that made geography meaningless and distance optional. He opened the drawer of his desk. Inside was a photograph of his mother, taken in 1985, her eyes the same eyes that Mia Voss now carried in her own face. The eyes of someone who had learned to disappear inside herself. He placed his hand over that photograph. And he made himself another promise, the way he had done so many times before. The way he had sworn to himself in snow, in darkness, in the terrible clarity of a moment when weakness is no longer acceptable and survival becomes the only option. Never again, he whispered to the photograph. Never again will a man like Douglas Hale believe that he can reach into the world and take what he wants without consequence. Never again will cruelty wear a manager's tie in my restaurant and call it authority. He picked up his phone. He called his best investigator. I need everything, he said. Every piece of paper. Every transaction. Every connection between Douglas Hale and a woman named Evelyn Blackwell. I need it by tomorrow night. The response came immediately. You will have it. Nicholas ended the call. Outside, the Los Angeles afternoon had turned gray. Clouds had moved in from the Pacific. The kind of clouds that suggested rain was coming. The kind of weather that made everything feel like it was about to change. Like the world itself was taking a breath before it exhaled something new into existence. And in that moment, with the storm gathering and the city turning its face toward the coming darkness, Nicholas Valenti began to move. Slowly at first. Then with increasing velocity. The way a tsunami builds in the deep ocean, invisible, unstoppable, bringing everything it touches toward transformation or destruction, depending on what the object had earned through its actions. He was coming for Douglas Hale. He was coming for Evelyn Blackwell. And everyone in Los Angeles who had built fortunes from desperation was about to learn that Nicholas Valenti had finally found a reason to use his power for something other than profit. The bathroom tiles were cold beneath Mia's feet as she stood before the sink, her reflection fractured in the mirror like something already broken. She had been washing her hands when the door opened behind her, and the smell came first, Chanel No. 5, expensive and choking, the kind of fragrance that announced arrival the way a trumpet announces royalty. Evelyn Blackwell stood in the doorway like a blade wrapped in silk. She was 54 years old but had paid enough money to appear 42. Her hair was platinum blonde, blown smooth and immaculate. Her diamond earrings caught the bathroom light and threw it back like tiny accusations. She wore a cream-colored suit that cost more than Mia's rent for 3 months, and her red lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. You, Evelyn said. Just that single word, but it landed like a gunshot in the silence. Mia's hand stilled under the water. She could see Evelyn's reflection watching her from the mirror, and she made herself turn around, made herself meet those ice-blue eyes directly. I do not know what you are talking about, Mia said quietly. Evelyn stepped closer, and the bathroom seemed to shrink. You think a man like Nicholas Valenti cares about trash like you? Her voice dripped poison, each word a small blade. He is using you. When he is done with you, you will disappear like the others. You will be forgotten. Less than forgotten, erased, as if you never existed at all. Mia's hands had begun to shake. She clenched them into fists, pressing her nails into her palms until small crescents of pain bloomed in her skin. Pain was easier to control than fear. Stay away from him, Evelyn continued, stepping so close that Mia could smell the perfume now, could see the veneer of her teeth beneath that cruel smile. Or your children will pay the price. The words landed like a physical blow. Mia's breath caught in her throat. Emma, is that her name? Evelyn tilted her head. Age 6? Such a beautiful, fragile little thing. Such a dangerous world for little girls. Car accidents happen so suddenly. Children disappear from playgrounds. Diseases strike without warning. Something shifted in Mia's chest. Not fear this time. Something deeper. Something that had been sleeping since the night Nicholas Valenti had found her in the snow, and now it was waking up. Touch my children, Mia said, her voice steady as ice, and I will burn your entire world down. She did not know where the words came from. She had never spoken that way before. But she meant them with a ferocity that seemed to surprise even Evelyn, because the older woman's smile faltered. For just 1 second, uncertainty flickered across her face like a candle caught in the wind. You have no power, Evelyn said, but her voice had changed. The venom had diluted into something more desperate. You are nobody. Then it should be very easy for you to forget about me, Mia replied. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She turned and walked out without another word, her heels clicking against the tile floor like a countdown to something neither of them could quite see coming. The bathroom door swung closed, and Mia was alone with her reflection again, with her shaking hands and her racing heart and the terrible knowledge that she had just made an enemy of a woman who had the power to destroy her. That night, the temperature dropped to 28 degrees. Los Angeles, which rarely saw winter, had decided to show its teeth. Mia walked home through freezing rain that fell like accusations. It soaked through her thin coat, which had been bought at a discount store 3 years ago and had never quite been waterproof. The rain turned her hair into wet ropes that slapped against her neck. Her shoes, old white sneakers with holes in both heels, squelched with each step, and her socks were soggy and cold and made every footfall feel like she was walking through someone else's sadness. The walk was 2 miles. Normally it took 35 minutes. Tonight it took 47 because she kept stopping, kept wrapping her arms around herself, kept trying to breathe in a way that did not feel like drowning. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold them at her sides. The shaking was not just from the cold. It was from the weight of Evelyn's words pressing down on her like water, pushing her deeper and deeper into a darkness she thought she had already survived. What if Evelyn is right? The thought arrived like a visitor she had been dreading. What if being near Nicholas puts Emma in danger? What if her children would be safer if she disappeared? What if she was too broken, too damaged, too poor to ever escape this cycle, and every moment she stayed with Nicholas was a moment she was pulling her babies closer to a cliff they could not see? The bridge over the LA River appeared through the rain like it had been waiting for her. Black water moved beneath it, moving toward the ocean the way everything eventually moved toward the ocean, the way everything eventually moved toward an ending. Mia stopped in the center of the bridge. The rain hammered down on her head. It ran down her face and she could not tell where the rain ended and her tears began. Her hands gripped the metal railing. It was so cold it burned. Her palms stung against the wetness. Below her, the black water promised something. An ending. A way out. A place where no one could hurt her anymore because she would be gone. Emma would be safer without her, would not be at risk because of her connection to a powerful man. Emma would be sad, yes, but sad could heal. Dead mothers could not hurt their daughters from beyond the grave. Her phone buzzed. The sound was loud enough to cut through the rain, through her spiraling thoughts, through the siren song of that dark water below. Mia fumbled in her pocket and found her phone, the screen glowing in the darkness. A text from her neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Emma made you a drawing at school today. She drew you with wings and a crown. She is so proud. She cannot wait to show you. She keeps saying, Mommy likes pretty colors. Hurry home. One tiny thing. Mia read the message again. Then again. Emma with wings and a crown. Emma saying, Mommy likes pretty colors. The pure, uncomplicated love of a 6-year-old who believed her mother was beautiful and powerful and worthy of being drawn with wings. Mia stepped back from the railing. Her legs shook as she turned away from the black water. She wiped her face with her wet hands, which accomplished nothing except to spread the cold around, but the movement was enough. It was permission. It was survival. It was a small, stubborn refusal to let the darkness have her. She walked toward home. What Mia did not know was that Tony sat in a black SUV 50 feet behind her, parked in the shadows beneath the bridge. He had been sitting there for 20 minutes, his phone in hand, ready to move if she had taken one more step toward that railing. Ready to catch her. Ready to pull her back from a darkness that Nicholas Valenti had already decided did not get to have her. Tony watched as she turned away from the edge. He watched as she began walking again. He picked up his phone and sent a single message. "She is safe. Walking home now." The response came immediately, "Thank you." Nicholas Valenti received Tony's report at 11:48 p.m. He sat in his office on the 42nd floor of a building in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of building with his name on it in letters of brushed steel. The city sprawled below him, millions of lights, millions of lives, all of them unaware of the decisions being made in rooms like this one. He sat in silence for a long time. Then he made a call. "It is time," he said. At 2:56 a.m., 12 men in black tactical gear moved through the rain like ghosts. They did not run. They did not shout. They moved with the precision of an operation that had been planned down to the second, every angle calculated, every contingency prepared for. Douglas Hale lived in a studio apartment on the east side of Los Angeles, the kind of place a man kept when he had a wife who was still living in the house they had bought together and a series of women he did not want her to find out about. He was sleeping when they came for him. He was dreaming of the tip money he had stolen, which had added up to nearly $17,000 over the years. He was not dreaming of consequences. Men like Douglas Hale rarely did. The door came open with a sound like thunder. Hale woke screaming. He was dragged from his bed in his underwear, his soft belly exposed, his legs kicking uselessly against the floor. Tony stood above him, and his face was empty of everything except absolute cold. "You like putting your hands on women who cannot fight back," Tony said, his voice flat and without inflection, which made it worse than if he had been angry. "Let us see how you do against men who can." Hale's screams echoed through the hallway. Other residents closed their doors. In this city, you did not get involved with the people in black. They zip-tied his wrists and ankles. They put a black hood over his head so complete darkness became his only reality. They carried him like he was a piece of furniture, something broken that needed to be disposed of, and they threw him into the back of a waiting van. The doors slammed shut. The van moved into the night. At that same hour, in a mansion in Brentwood where the houses cost more than most people's net worth, FBI agents with federal warrants swarmed the grounds at exactly 6:03 a.m., just as dawn was breaking gray and cold over Los Angeles. Evelyn Blackwell was dragged from her bed in her $700 silk robe, her platinum blonde hair matted on one side from sleep, her ice blue eyes wide with a shock and fury that had never before encountered consequences. "You cannot do this," she screamed, as agents placed handcuffs on her wrists. "I have lawyers. I have senators on speed dial. I will have you all fired, and I will sue this agency until it is nothing but dust." But the agents did not stop. They had been waiting for this warrant for 3 years. The charges filled 11 pages. Racketeering. Human trafficking across 6 states. Labor exploitation. Tax evasion totaling $4,700,000. Conspiracy. Coercion. The systematic destruction of vulnerable women like Mia, like hundreds of other women, like the machinery of cruelty that wealthy people had engineered into existence. The cameras were waiting outside. Neighbors filmed on their phones. Within 15 minutes, Evelyn Blackwell's mugshot was being broadcast on every news outlet in California. The society queen who had lunched with senators and hosted charity galas was now famous for something entirely different. The mansion was seized. Her bank accounts were frozen. Every asset she owned was documented and catalogued and removed from her control. The sentence came down like an executioner's blade, 40 years minimum in federal prison. Douglas Hale never appeared in a courtroom. He was delivered to the Contadino family on a rainy dock at the edge of the Los Angeles harbor, where the smell of salt water and diesel fuel hung heavy in the air. Nicholas Valenti walked him out himself, his hand on Hale's arm, his men flanking them on either side. The warehouse roof above them was being hammered by rain that sounded like thousands of small fists demanding entry. The Contadino family had been waiting for Douglas Hale for 5 years. Their nephew, Domenico, had died in federal prison after Hale testified against him in a trial that sent him away. 5 years of waiting. 5 years of patience. 5 years of the understanding that justice was a slow and methodical thing for people who had the time to wait for it. Nicholas pushed Hale forward, toward the shadows and the figures waiting in those shadows, toward whatever retribution the Contadino family had been crafting in their collective imagination. "Death is too quick," Nicholas said, his voice steady as stone. "Too easy. Too merciful. Let him live long enough to regret every woman he ever touched." Hale began screaming before the shadows even reached him. He was screaming for his life. He was screaming for mercy. He was begging Nicholas Valenti for a bullet instead of whatever waited for him in the darkness. His voice echoed through the warehouse, and then the doors closed, and there was only the sound of rain on the metal roof and the terrible silence that comes after a man realizes he has finally encountered a consequence his money and his position and his cruelty cannot escape. Douglas Hale was never seen again. What Mia Voss did not know, as she slept safely in her apartment with Emma curled against her chest, was that both her tormentors had been erased from the world while she rested. Evelyn Blackwell was in a federal holding cell, her silk robe exchanged for orange prison clothing, her name transformed from society matron into cautionary tale. Douglas Hale was experiencing a darkness deeper than any he had ever inflicted on anyone else. The rain continued to fall on Los Angeles. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mia Voss slept through the entire night without nightmares. 3 months had passed since the night the rain fell on Los Angeles and 2 people disappeared from the world as if they had never existed at all. Mia Voss counted out the last bills from her apron, $187 earned from an honest day's work, every single dollar hers to keep because the manager of Valenti's restaurant now was a woman named Catherine who believed that tips belonged to the hands that earned them. Mia placed the money on her kitchen table next to the other stacks, organized in careful piles. $4,200. Enough for a down payment. Enough for hope. Emma sat at the small table doing her homework, a new uniform from the better school hanging pressed and perfect on the back of the chair. Her son was asleep in the other room, his breathing steady and safe. She had not thought about Douglas Hale in weeks. She had not thought about Evelyn Blackwell at all. These people had been erased, and with them, the fear that had lived in her chest like a permanent stone. What she did notice was the man in the corner booth. Every night Nicholas Valenti sat there, a black espresso cooling in front of him, his dark eyes watching the room with the weight of someone accustomed to owning everything his gaze touched. He never demanded anything. He never approached her. But there was something in the way he looked at her now, not like a boss watching a waitress, but like someone witnessing a quiet miracle unfold one shift at a time. 1 year earlier, Nicholas Valenti had been a man who believed power meant never showing weakness, never permitting anyone close enough to matter. Then a woman with $34 in her pocket walked into his life through a blizzard, and everything he understood about strength shattered like ice under pressure. Tonight was different. Tonight he had a guest. The private dining room in the back of Valenti's was lit by candles that cast dancing shadows across the walls, the kind of careful lighting that made everything feel both intimate and impossibly far away. Nicholas sat across from his daughter Emma, 6 years old, with his dark eyes and his serious mouth, wearing a dress the color of sapphires. She had been pulled from her boarding school upstate for the weekend, and he wanted her to see where her father spent his evenings, wanted her to understand that even in the spaces where he conducted business, there existed beauty and order and a certain kind of care. Emma picked at her tiramisu with a small silver spoon, her tongue darting out to taste the mascarpone. She was telling him about her mathematics instructor, something about fractions and how they made no sense to her at all, and Nicholas was listening the way only a parent who had lost years to distance could listen, with the desperate attention of someone trying to collect every word, every gesture, every moment he had missed. The kitchen door swung open and Mia appeared with a tray, moving through the restaurant with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to navigate through other people's spaces. She did not know that Nicholas had funded her enrollment in night classes at the community college. She did not know that the scholarship letter that had arrived at her apartment had his signature hidden inside the letterhead, buried in the fine print where no one would think to look. She did not know that for 3 months, every time she walked, there were men positioned 2 blocks away, watching to ensure that the world remained safe for her and her children. She approached the booth and set down a fresh espresso in front of Nicholas, and as she turned, Emma reached for her glass of water, her small hand trembling just slightly as she lifted it to her lips. Then her entire body went rigid. The glass fell. Water spilled across the white tablecloth in a spreading stain like a map of something terrible. Emma's hands flew to her throat and she gasped, a sound like a door slamming shut, like the end of something precious. Her lips were turning blue. Not a pale blue like a winter sky, but a terrible, spreading blue like bruises flowering across her mouth. "Papa," she whispered, and the word shattered something in Nicholas Valenti's chest that he did not know was still capable of breaking. Mia moved before her mind had finished processing what she was seeing. She had worked at Valenti's long enough to know the private dining room, to know that there was a fully stocked bar behind the mahogany counter. Her hands found the activated charcoal used for certain cocktails, and she was already moving, already pushing through the noise of Nicholas shouting for his doctor, for the ambulance, for someone to do something about his daughter, who was beginning to lose consciousness, whose small body was shutting down in front of him. "Emma," Nicholas was saying, his voice transformed into something raw and animal. He was on his knees, pulling his daughter close, and he was not a man who got on his knees for anyone. Mia forced the activated charcoal mixture past Emma's blue lips. She had spent the night 3 months ago reading the margins of her grandmother's recipe book, the pages her grandmother had filled with notes about poisons and their antidotes, a documentation of the things that had happened in the old country, the things that no one was supposed to remember. Oleander! She had recognized the sudden onset, the blue lips, the way Emma's breathing was beginning to fail. "Turn her on her side," Mia commanded, and Nicholas obeyed without question because in that moment he would have obeyed a ghost, would have obeyed death itself if it had spoken with authority. "Stay with her. Stay with her, Mr. Valenti. She is going to come back to us." The activated charcoal worked. Emma coughed, gasped, her small lungs drawing in air like a drowning person breaking through water. The blue began to fade. Her eyes fluttered open, confused and terrified but alive, so impossibly alive. The paramedics arrived and took her to the hospital, and the tests confirmed what Mia had already known. The tiramisu had been poisoned with oleander extract, a substance so rare that the hospital's toxicology team had almost missed it entirely. Someone had wanted Emma dead. Someone had wanted Nicholas to experience the loss he had inflicted on so many others. Later, after Emma had been admitted for observation and cleared to go home in the morning, Nicholas and Mia sat in that candlelit booth. The candles had burned lower. The restaurant beyond the private room had emptied out. There was only the sound of rain against the windows and the low hum of the kitchen being cleaned for the night. "How did you know?" Nicholas asked, and his voice was not the voice of a Mafia boss. It was the voice of a man whose hands were still shaking from holding his dying daughter. Mia reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a small leather-bound book, aged and worn, the spine cracked from decades of use. She opened it to a page marked in the margin with faded ink, and she turned it toward him so he could read the words her grandmother had written in Korean, words that had been translated into the margins of a recipe for chocolate cake. "My grandmother," Mia said quietly, "documented everything. The incidents that happened in the old country. The people who tried to harm her family. The poisons they used. The ways to save people from them." Nicholas read the entry. His entire body went still. The notes mentioned operations from 1993, operations that had run through the port of Los Angeles, operations that involved a woman named Evelyn Blackwell and a man named Douglas Hale, operations that had been connected to his father's empire before his father had been put into the ground. "This book," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper, "this is why they wanted you dead." Mia nodded. She had understood for weeks now. Tony had finally told her 3 days ago, after Nicholas had made the decision to tell her everything. The security detail. The watching. The protection that had wrapped around her and her children like invisible armor. The fact that Douglas Hale no longer existed, that Evelyn Blackwell was sitting in a federal holding cell, that her testimony, the recipe book, the evidence in its margins, had been enough to unravel years of corruption that stretched backward through decades, through multiple families, through multiple sins. "You have been watching me this whole time," Mia said, "and it was not a question." "I have been protecting you," Nicholas replied. "There is a difference." He reached across the table and took her hand, and the touch was gentle in a way that seemed impossible for a man whose hands had been trained to break things. His skin was warm. His grip was steady. He had spent his life learning to hold power, but what he was learning now was how to hold something infinitely more fragile, another person's trust. "You saved my daughter's life," he said. "You stood equal to me tonight when everyone else with money and connections and power froze. You saw what was happening and you moved. You knew what to do when no one else in this entire city would have known. Mia Voss, you are not nobody. You never were." The candlelight caught in her eyes, and for a moment she was not the desperate woman who had walked through a blizzard with $34 in her pocket. She was someone who had rebuilt herself from ashes, who had reclaimed her own dignity, who had stood in the face of the most dangerous man in Los Angeles and shown him what real strength looked like. "What happens now?" she asked. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, listening to the rain, listening to the absence of violence that had characterized his entire life until a frozen night 3 months ago when he had seen a woman's broken figure in the snow and decided that mercy was a kind of power too. "Now," he said, "we build something. Together." 1 year later, Mia Voss stood behind the counter at Valenti's restaurant, no longer a waitress but the manager, promoted after completing a business course that Nicholas had anonymously funded through a scholarship that bore her grandmother's name. She had $22,000 in a savings account that she had accumulated one shift, one tip, one honest dollar at a time. Emma and her son attended good schools. Her apartment had become a small house, purchased with a down payment that represented not charity but the result of her own labor, her own determination, her own refusal to remain invisible. Nicholas still occupied his corner booth most evenings. Mia still brought him espresso, but now she sat across from him and they spoke like equals, about the restaurant, about the business courses she was considering, about the children playing in the corner booth under Tony's watchful eye, Emma Valenti and Mia's son building something with blocks, their laughter the most dangerous sound Nicholas had ever heard because it represented the possibility of a future that did not require violence to protect. The grandmother's recipe book sat in a safety deposit box now, its secrets preserved but no longer needed. Evelyn Blackwell was 3 years into a 40-year federal sentence. Douglas Hale had simply vanished one rainy night, and no one had ever found enough of him to bury. Nicholas looked at Mia across the candlelit table and felt something he thought had died in soul when he was 9 years old, the belief that kindness was possible, that protection could come from compassion rather than terror, that the strongest man in a room might be the one who remembered what it meant to be powerless and chose to shield rather than wound. Outside, rain began to fall on Los Angeles again. Inside Valenti's restaurant, the candlelight held steady, casting its warm glow across a room full of people who had survived their own darkness and found that sometimes, miracles come from the most unexpected places. "After the rain, the sky clears," Nicholas said, and Mia smiled because she understood that he was not simply talking about weather. "And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places." If this story moved your heart, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Subscribe because tomorrow's story will show you why the most powerful transformations come from the most unexpected places. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video.